With me today, three guests. David Berlinski is a philosopher, mathematician, and author who has lived in Paris for a couple of decades now and is now the editor of Inference, the International Review of Science. David Gelernter is a professor of computer science at Yale and the author of a number of books, including most recently The Tides of Mind, Uncovering the Spectrum of Consciousness. Stephen Meyer is a philosopher and author. He directs the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute, a think tank in Seattle. Here's what brings us together. In the Claremont Review of Books this past spring, David Gelernter published an essay titled Giving Up Darwin. Quote, Stephen Meyer's thoughtful and meticulous book, Darwin's Doubt, convinced me that Darwin has failed. The Deniable Darwin and Other Essays, a book by David Berlinski, is also, quote, essential. David Gelernter, David Berlinski, Stephen Meyer, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, definitions. Darwin's book is on the origin of species, and to quote from David Gelerner's essay, quote, there's no reason to doubt that Darwin successfully explained the small adjustments by which an organism adapts to local circumstances, changes to fur density, or wing style, or beak shape. Yet there are many reasons to doubt whether he can explain the big picture, not the fine-tuning of existing species, but the emergence of new ones.
It was a comprehensive synthesis, and so from the standpoint of what scientists look for, it had an appeal. It was also a well-argued book, The Origin of Species, but it was well-argued on the basis of evidence that was known in the 19th century and not things that we've learned mostly from the 20th and 21st.
Okay, we come to that now. Again from David Gelerner's essay, quote, Darwinian, the fossil record, problem one, the fossil record, Darwinian evolution, I'm quoting you, is gradual, step by step. Yet in the Cambrian Explosion of around 500 million years ago, a striking variety of new organisms, including the first ever animals, pop up suddenly in the fossil record over a mere 70 million years.
You know, it was a problem that even Darwin was aware of, and he wrote about it in The Origin of Species. He said it was inexplicable on his view of life. But he felt that the future fossil finds would fill in the missing ancestral forms that were evident. What happens in the Cambrian is you get a huge number of what are called the animal body plans, where a body plan is a unique configuration of body parts and tissues. And they arrive very abruptly in the fossil record without discernible connection to earlier precursors or earlier ancestors in the Precambrian record.
If this wall were the side of a canyon, halfway up we'd see...
You have a stripe of rock, and in that stripe you'd find a whole bunch of new forms of animal life.
And in the layers underneath, there would be no intermediate, there'd be nothing leading to that.
With any discernible connection.
Up.
Right. And so the Cambrian explosion itself has been differently dated, but increasingly the date that David used of 70 million years is a very generous date for it. The age range is actually narrowing as a result of additional findings. It's now about 10 million years is the increasingly accepted date, and there are major explosions. In one Chinese seam, there's 13 to 16 different major groups of animals that have arisen in a 5 to 6 million year window. It's incredibly abrupt geologically when you consider the age of the Earth is 4.5 billion years. It's also very abrupt biologically, because there is a mathematical branch of Darwinian theory called population genetics that allows us to calculate how much change, evolutionary change, we ought to expect in a given amount of time if we know things like the mutation rate, the generation time, the population sizes. And 5, 10, even 70 million years is a blink of an eye in terms of the calculations that can be made for what are called waiting times. And the expected waiting times for the amount of change that's evident in the Cambrian blow out the time scale, if you will. They're hundreds of millions or billions of years. So this is a really unexpected event, both biologically, mathematically, and geologically on a Darwinian view of things.
What does generating new forms of life entail? Many biologists agree that generating a new shape of protein is the essence of it. Argument step number one. Argument step number two. And inventing a new protein means inventing a new gene.
I'll explain it in terms that would be familiar to David. If you want to give a computer a new function, write a new program for it to accomplish a new function, you've got to give it new code. And the big discovery of 20th century biology, following Watson and Crick in what's now called the molecular biological revolution, is the same thing is true in life. You want to invent a new form of life, you've got to have code in the form of the information inscribed along the spine of the DNA molecule, and we're learning, and other forms of information. So you need the information to build the protein molecules that service the different types of cells, and then you need additional information to arrange the cells into the body plans. And so the Cambrian explosion is an explosion of biological form, but it's also an explosion of biological information. And that fact gives us a way of grappling with this question that Darwin didn't have, because we know something about what it takes to generate information in our high-tech digital world of computing.